The sun wasn't even up yet when I heard it. The deep, guttural roar of engines, the kind that sent vibrations through my bones and rattled the windows of my farmhouse. It was the kind of noise that didn't belong on a quiet stretch of land like mine, where the only thing that should have been stirring at this hour were my cows, maybe a few stubborn chickens. I bolted upright, half convinced I was dreaming, but then came the sound of metal tearing into the earth, of something massive being ripped apart. I stumbled to the window, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and what I saw nearly knocked the air out of my lungs. A row of construction vehicles, bulldozers, excavators, and cement trucks, lined up like they were staging an invasion. And they weren't just parked. They were moving. On my land. Right through my fields. A long, jagged wound of freshly dug earth stretched across my property, my fence posts snapped like twigs, my crops flattened beneath the weight of tires bigger than my truck. Men in reflective vests shouted orders over the rumble of machinery, gesturing with clipboards like they were conducting a perfectly legal operation. The kind of operation that should have, at the very least, involved my permission. I didn't bother with shoes. I stormed out the door in nothing but pajama pants and an old t-shirt, the morning chill doing nothing to cool the fire boiling in my gut. My dog, Rusty, tore after me, barking like he was just as furious as I was. As I got closer, the details of my nightmare became even clearer. Half my pasture was already obliterated, tire tracks carving deep scars into what used to be fertile land. A road. They were building a damn road, and I had no idea why. A man in a polo shirt and khakis stood near the chaos, arms crossed, surveying the destruction with the kind of satisfaction that suggested this was all going according to plan. I honed in on him like a guided missile. "Hey!" I shouted over the noise. "What the hell is going on here?" The man turned, and his expression was a mixture of boredom and mild annoyance, like I was inconveniencing him. "Ah," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "You must be the property owner. Good morning." He said it like he was greeting a guest at a country club, not the rightful owner of the land they were actively plowing through. I could already feel my blood pressure spiking. "Yeah, I'm the owner, and unless I missed a crucial memo, I don't remember agreeing to let a damn highway run through my farm." The man, who I now realized had the polished, insufferable air of an HOA board member, didn't even flinch. Instead, he adjusted his glasses and flipped through his papers with an air of exaggerated patience. "We're expanding access to the community," he said, as if that explained everything. "The HOA board approved this development last month." I blinked at him. Once. Twice. "The HOA?" I repeated, as if saying it again might make it sound less stupid. "I'm not part of your HOA. I own this land. This is a private farm. Not your neighborhood." His lips pursed in an expression of mild inconvenience. "Yes, well," he said, waving a hand at the chaos behind him, "your property was identified as the most efficient route for our new road system. It's going to be great for community engagement." I felt something in my brain snap, like a loose wire sparking dangerously close to an explosion. "Community engagement?" I sputtered. "Are you out of your mind? You're trespassing. You're destroying my land. You didn't even ask for permission." The man sighed like he was so very tired of dealing with silly little landowners who didn't understand the big picture. "Look, sir, this was already voted on. The road is happening. And, as a bonus, you'll now have access to the HOA's amenities. That includes security patrols, street maintenance, and neighborhood events." I had never in my life wanted to physically throw someone into a freshly dug trench more than I did at that moment. "I don't need your security patrols," I growled. "I have a shotgun. And if you don't get off my property, you're about to meet it." The man had the audacity to chuckle, like I was some cranky old man shaking my fist at progress. "Oh, I wouldn't do that," he said, shaking his head. "That could result in legal action." "Legal action?" I barked out a laugh, though there was absolutely nothing funny about any of this. "You're the ones breaking the law. You're trespassing, you're damaging private property, And you're acting like I should be grateful you just tore through my farm like a wrecking ball." He held up a finger, that smug HOA confidence shining through. "Actually, according to our community regulations, I am not in your community." The words were slow, deliberate, practically vibrating with fury, but he either didn't care or was too far up his own HOA-approved backside to hear reason. Then came the final blow, the one that turned my brain into static and nearly short-circuited whatever restraint I had left. "By the way," the man added, flipping to a different page on his clipboard, "since your property now benefits from our road, you'll need to start paying HOA fees. You owe $1,200 by the 1st of the month." I stared at him. I stared at the destruction behind him. I stared at the bulldozer parked on my land like it belonged there. And then I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound, the kind that made Rusty whine and back away. "You're joking," I said, rubbing a hand down my face. "You have to be joking." The man, looking genuinely pleased with himself, smiled. "Not at all." The rage that exploded through me was so intense, so blinding, that for a brief moment I saw my entire future flash before my eyes. It involved lawsuit. A lot of lawsuit. I took a slow breath, my mind already working through the 100 different ways I was going to make them regret this. They thought they could steamroll me? They thought I'd roll over and take this? Oh, they had no idea what they'd just started. I stood in the middle of my own farm, staring at the fresh scar they had carved through my land like it was their birthright, and something deep inside me settled. Not in the way anger simmers down, but in the way a storm gathers strength before it turns into a full-blown disaster. They thought they could waltz onto my property, rip apart my livelihood, and then have the nerve to charge me for it? They thought I would just roll over and accept my new fate as a reluctant member of their insufferable HOA? No. Absolutely not. I was raised to stand my ground, and if they wanted a fight, they had just picked the wrong man. I marched back to my house, Rusty trailing behind me with his ears pinned back, sensing the tension radiating off me like a bonfire about to turn into an inferno. The moment I stepped inside, I grabbed my phone and called the only person I knew who would enjoy this mess as much as I would, Tucker. Tucker was not just any lawyer. He was the kind of legal bulldog who could make a corporate CEO break out in a cold sweat with just a well-worded letter. He specialized in finding loopholes, exposing corruption, and turning lawsuits into absolute carnage. He was also my cousin, which meant he would not only help me out of principle but would also take immense pleasure in dragging these HOA clowns through every legal pitfall known to mankind. The phone barely rang twice before he picked up. "You sound like you just found out someone stole your tractor," Tucker said by way of greeting. "Worse," I muttered, pinching the bridge of my nose as I relayed the entire catastrophe to him, how the HOA had plowed through my land, built a road without permission, and then, in the most ridiculous display of arrogance I had ever witnessed, had the audacity to slap me with an HOA bill. By the time I was done, I could hear Tucker's sharp inhale, the kind that told me he had just found his new favorite case to rip apart. "Wow," he finally said, dragging the word out like he was savoring it. "They really stepped in it this time." "Oh, we're past stepping," I gritted out. "They jumped headfirst into a vat of legal acid, and I want to be the one holding the bucket." Tucker let out a low chuckle. "Well, lucky for you, they just handed you a golden ticket. Did you get anything in writing?" "Oh yeah." HOA guy was practically waving paperwork in my face, bragging about how they had approved the road in some meeting I was never invited to. "I bet my bottom dollar they don't have a single legitimate deed transfer or easement approval." "Even better," Tucker said, his excitement growing. "Because you know what this means, right?" I exhaled sharply. "That they're screwed? That they're beyond screwed. They're about to experience the kind of legal beatdown that will make them wish they had built that road straight into the ocean instead. I'll need every document they sent you, photos of the destruction, and a witness statement. Oh, and we're not just defending you against their ridiculous lawsuit. We're countersuing." A slow grin spread across my face, the first real smile I had managed since this whole nightmare began. "Now you're talking. And trust me," Tucker continued, "by the time I'm done with them, they're going to be paying you. Not the other way around." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I documented everything: the broken fence posts, the ruined crops, the absolute mockery they had made of my property. I even got a local surveyor involved, who confirmed that not only had they built the road illegally, but they had also violated at least 3 zoning laws in the process. Tucker, being the genius that he was, dug even deeper and found that their entire board had been playing fast and loose with regulations for years. The best part? Their bylaws had a fatal flaw. They only applied to properties within their jurisdiction, and since they had never legally annexed my land, they had no authority over me whatsoever. Meaning their lawsuit was not only invalid but could also be classified as harassment. But we weren't going to stop there. Oh no, we were going to make them regret every single decision that led them to thinking they could mess with me. Tucker drafted the counter-lawsuit so aggressively that when the HOA's legal team finally received it, I imagined their board members collectively breaking into a cold sweat. And sure enough, it didn't take long for the first sign of panic to appear. I was out in the barn one evening, trying to salvage what little I could of the pasture, when a shiny black SUV rolled up my driveway. Out stepped none other than HOA President Extraordinaire, looking far less smug than he had during our last encounter. He adjusted his tie, plastered on the fakest smile I had ever seen, and approached like he was about to negotiate world peace. "Mr. Dawson," he said smoothly, "I believe we may have gotten off on the wrong foot." I leaned against the barn door, crossing my arms. "You don't say?" He cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably under my stare. "Look, there's no reason for things to get messy. I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." I tilted my head. "Oh, you mean like how you arranged to bulldoze my farm without permission and then build me for it?" His eye twitched, but he forced another grin. "Mistakes were made, but we don't have to let lawyers get involved. Maybe we could work something out privately." I let the silence stretch just long enough to watch him squirm before I gave him the coldest smile I could muster. "Oh, you're absolutely right," I said. "We're definitely going to work something out." "In court?" His face fell, and for the first time I saw actual fear flicker in his eyes. He started to stammer out some weak excuse, but I had already turned on my heel and walked away, leaving him standing in the dust. They wanted a war? They had just declared one. The courtroom was packed, not just with lawyers and judges, but with a mix of curious spectators, local farmers, and a few smug HOA board members who still thought they had the upper hand. I sat at my table, arms crossed, completely at ease while Tucker flipped through his stack of documents like a man about to deliver a knockout punch. Across from us, the HOA's legal team looked far less composed, their lead attorney whispering urgently to their president, who was now noticeably sweating through his expensive suit. The judge, an older man with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the paperwork in front of him before clearing his throat. The moment had arrived. "Mr. Dawson," the judge began, turning his attention to me, "you are being sued by the Homeowners Association for failing to comply with their community road project and refusing to pay the required fees associated with it. How do you plead?" I kept my face neutral, but inside I was barely containing my amusement. Tucker, on the other hand, was practically vibrating with anticipation. He rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket with deliberate precision. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty on the grounds that he is not, and has never been, a member of the HOA. Furthermore, we are countersuing for damages, illegal land seizure, and harassment." The HOA's lawyer, a man who looked like he had expected this to be an easy case, shifted uncomfortably before rising from his chair. "Your Honor, the defendant's property falls within the HOA's jurisdiction based on community expansion plans that were voted on and approved." Tucker didn't even wait for the judge to respond. "And yet," he said smoothly, flipping to one of the many pages in his folder, Nowhere in those expansion plans does it show legal annexation of Mr. Dawson's land. No signatures, no county approval, no legal transfer of property. Just a bunch of board members who decided to take it upon themselves to claim land they had no right to? He turned the page dramatically. In fact, if we dig a little deeper, we'll find that not only did the HOA fail to legally annex the property, but they also bypassed necessary environmental and zoning permits to even begin construction. That alone makes their road project not just unlawful, but a direct violation of multiple county regulations. There was a collective murmur through the courtroom. The HOA president paled, and their lawyer fumbled with his notes before quickly recovering. That may be true, Your Honor, but the road has already been built, and since the defendant has been benefiting from its existence, the HOA has the right to request his participation in community maintenance fees. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Tucker, on the other hand, showed no such restraint. Benefiting? He echoed, raising an eyebrow. My client's land was destroyed. His fence was torn down, his crops were crushed, his livestock were displaced, and now, instead of a functioning farm, he's got a paved road running through the middle of it. The only people benefiting from this are the HOA members who now have a shortcut to their houses. My client, on the other hand, has suffered financial losses due to an unauthorized project that was illegally constructed. He placed a document on the judge's desk. Which brings us to our counter-lawsuit. We're seeking full compensation for damages, lost revenue, and punitive fees for trespassing and harassment. The judge looked down at the document, then back at the HOA's visibly crumbling legal team. Do you have a response to these allegations? The lawyer hesitated, flipping through his own papers in a desperate attempt to find something that could save them. The HOA president leaned in, whispering furiously in his ear, but it was clear that whatever confidence they had walked in with had evaporated. Finally, the lawyer cleared his throat and attempted to salvage what little ground they had left. Your Honor, while we acknowledge that there may have been procedural oversights, the road itself is a public asset, and removing it now would cause unnecessary disruption to the community. Tucker smirked. Ah, so now it's a public asset? Because just a few minutes ago you were claiming it was part of a private HOA project. Which is it? The lawyer opened his mouth, closed it, then turned a shade paler. The judge, clearly unimpressed, leaned back in his chair and adjusted his glasses. I think I've heard enough, he said, rubbing his temples as though this entire case had given him a headache. He turned to me. Mr. Dawson, I assume you want the road removed? I considered it for a moment, but then a better idea struck me. A much, much better idea. I leaned forward slightly. Actually, Your Honor, I have a counter-proposal. Tucker glanced at me, interested, but he knew me well enough to trust that whatever was about to come out of my mouth was going to be good. The judge raised an eyebrow. Go on. I folded my hands on the table, my voice perfectly calm. Since the HOA built this road without my permission, destroyed my land in the process, and then had the audacity to sue me for fees I don't owe, I propose that they either pay me full damages plus additional compensation for unlawful land seizure, or we let the road stay. But I get to decide what happens to it. The judge blinked. And what would that entail? I smiled. Well, since it's technically on my private property, I'd be well within my rights to put up a toll booth and charge anyone who wants to use it. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. The HOA board members looked like they had just swallowed a bucket of nails. The spectators started whispering, and even the judge seemed momentarily caught off guard. Tucker, meanwhile, grinned like a shark that had just found its next meal. The HOA lawyer sputtered. That's absurd. You can't just... The judge held up a hand. Actually, he can. If the road is on his land and was built without legal approval, Mr. Dawson has full control over how it's used. He gave me a look that held the tiniest flicker of amusement. You're asking for a toll booth? I shrugged. Gotta make up for the financial losses somehow. The judge leaned back, tapping his fingers against the desk. Very well. I'll take all arguments into consideration and deliver my ruling shortly. Court is adjourned. As the gavel came down, the HOA members scrambled out of their seats, whispering furiously to one another. Tucker leaned over, smirking. You just scared the hell out of them. I grinned. Good. Let's see how they like it when they have to pay to use their own illegal road. The courtroom ruling came down faster than I expected, and when the judge finally delivered his decision, it was clear the HOA had just been served a disaster they never saw coming. Not only were they ordered to pay me full damages for the destruction of my land, but the judge also ruled that since the road was built without proper legal approval, the entire thing was now considered private property, my private property. Which meant that my little suggestion about a toll booth, that wasn't just a bluff anymore. That was my legal right. I could practically feel the HOA president's soul leaving his body as he realized what this meant. The smug confidence he had strutted into court with was now replaced with pure, unfiltered horror. His lawyer, who had probably been expecting an easy win, sat frozen in his seat like someone had just unplugged his brain. Meanwhile, Tucker was doing a very poor job of keeping a straight face as he shook my hand, barely suppressing the victorious smirk threatening to split his face in half. Outside the courthouse, I barely had a chance to breathe in the sweet air of justice before the HOA president came stomping up to me, his face an alarming shade of red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides like a child about to throw a tantrum. This is insane, he hissed, barely able to contain his rage. You think you can just take control of our community's road? You won't get away with this. I tilted my head slightly, as if I was giving his words serious thought, then shrugged. I mean, technically I already did. The judge said so. You know, the legally appointed official whose decision is now binding. I let the words sink in, watching as his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might snap. He opened his mouth, but before he could spit out another round of impotent rage, I raised a hand to cut him off. And just so we're clear, I'm not an unreasonable man. I'll happily keep the road open for public use. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering behind them, as if he knew there was a catch but wasn't sure where it was hiding. For a fee, I added with a slow, satisfied smile. That was the breaking point. The HOA president made a strangled sound somewhere between a gasp and a scream, spinning around like he was about to start punching the air. Tucker, standing beside me, let out a low whistle. Oh man, that one hit him deep. I had to admit, watching the HOA self-destruct in real time was deeply satisfying, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Over the next few weeks, I made good on my promise. I set up a fully operational toll booth right at the start of the road, complete with a bright red private property, toll required sign that was impossible to miss. Every HOA member who had once gleefully driven across my land without a second thought now had to pay me just to reach their own neighborhood. And the price? Oh, I made sure it stung. At first, they tried to fight it. They filed complaints, sent strongly worded letters, even tried to bring another lawsuit against me. But here's the thing, the law was on my side. Every single attempt they made to overturn the ruling got thrown out before it could even get off the ground. And as the days passed, their desperation became even more pathetic. I started seeing HOA board members trying to sneak around the toll booth, attempting to drive over unpaved sections of my land to avoid paying. But guess what? I installed cameras, and every time I caught one of them trespassing, I slapped them with a fine so heavy it made the toll look like pocket change. The cherry on top? Eventually, the HOA ran out of money. Between the legal fees, the damages they had to pay me, and the fact that most of their members refused to keep paying into an organization that got them stuck in this mess, their entire operation crumbled. One by one, people started leaving the HOA, refusing to participate in its ridiculous power plays. The board dissolved, the once smug president resigned in disgrace, and the neighborhood was left in shambles. And me? Well, I made a small fortune just from their suffering alone. But the best moment? The true coup de grace? That came months later when I was sitting on my porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a cold drink in hand, when a familiar car pulled up to the toll booth. I leaned forward slightly, curious. The driver hesitated before finally rolling down the window. And there he was. The former HOA president, the same man who had once smugly told me I owed them money for their road. Now, he sat there in his overpriced car, looking like he had aged a decade, his expression the very picture of defeat. I stood up slowly, making my way over as he cleared his throat awkwardly. "Listen," he muttered, barely able to meet my gaze, I moved out of the neighborhood, sold my house, but, turns out this is the fastest way to get to my new job." I stared at him for a long moment, letting the sheer irony of the situation sink in. Then, with a perfectly neutral expression, I pointed to the toll sign. His jaw clenched, but with clear reluctance, he reached into his wallet, pulled out the required amount, and handed it to me. I took it without a word, then slowly, deliberately, dropped it into the cash box with a satisfying clink. Then, as he started to drive through, I leaned down just enough so he could hear me over the hum of his engine. "You know," I mused, "I think I finally understand what you meant about community engagement." His hands tightened around the steering wheel, but he said nothing. He just pressed the gas and drove away, disappearing into the night. I turned back toward my house, a smirk tugging at my lips. Justice, as it turned out, tasted even better when it was paid for in cash.